Okay, we'll get started. Can I have your attention? We'll get started. There are some handouts in the back and the back left table there. Also, if you haven't signed up for the PC picnic, there's a form to sign up for the PC picnic. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute or two. Before we get to the main agenda of the meeting, we'll cover some of the club status. Our future meetings, next week we do have our picnic, and our picnic this year is going to be out at the Lake Elmo Park Reserve, and there'll be a little more information on the next slide or two. We do have a MACSIG that meets once a month. Their next meeting is Wednesday, August 17th. And you're welcome to, if you're not familiar with the MACSIG, you're welcome to attend both meetings, the MACSIGs and this meeting, so feel free to attend whatever you want. If you are interested in the MACSIG, Mike Griffin is the person who leads that, and he maintains his own distribution list to send out notices, so you'll want to get on his, and you can either respond back to me or talk to some of the other board members, and we'll get you set up. Our next general meeting is Wednesday, August 24th, and that'll be here, and the topic will be Adobe Lightroom Digital Photo Management by Jim Beardsley. Jim gave the presentation last month where he talked about some of the online options and some of the different photo management tools. So he'll be covering that in depth, kind of showing what it can do there. It's part of the Adobe Photographers Bundle, where you pay by the month, $9.99 per month. Lots of features and functions, so he'll be showing that. This is from one of our past meetings. If you haven't been out to the picnic, we have a nice spread of food, brats and burgers and beans and all kinds of food there. This was out at Tartan. This year, because Tartan's no longer available, we are going to the Lake Elmo Park Reserve. So that should be a little change there, but should be for the better. Our picnic, as I mentioned, is next Tuesday. You do have to sign up by today, so sign up, and if you want, you can, if Linda Brown isn't here yet, but if she does come, you can drop the money off with her, or you can drop it off with me, and we'll get it to Linda there. I mentioned that it's out at the Lake Elmo Park Reserve. Some of the early notices reference the South Shelter Pavilion, and if you're familiar with the area, there's a South Pavilion, and there's a North Pavilion. And we have the North Pavilion. So if you go to the South Pavilion and don't see anybody, or if they have a better party, you can stay there. Take your choice there. The cost for the picnic is $5 per person, whether you're a member or a guest. To get into the reserve, there is a $5 per car fee to enter if you don't already have a park permit. So some people are biking in. If you carpool in, it's just $5 per car to get into the reserve there. And don't give that money to us because we can't do anything with it. It's when you attempt to go in the gate there, that's where they'll be collecting it. We'll have our usual agenda of dinner. We do have prize drawings and our election of the officers. I mentioned we have brats, beef and veggie burgers, beans, potato salad, veggies, chips, and dessert. And we do have the prize drawings. We have $500 in door prizes, and we usually end up with between 40 and 50 people, so your odds are pretty good there. But you do have to RSVP by today. Our officers, our president is Jim Holman, and Jim's right there. Linda Brown, I mentioned, is collecting the money for the picnic. She's also our vice president. She's not here right now, but sometimes she comes in a little bit late. Paul Ebert is our membership secretary, and I don't see Paul here. And again, if you have checks for Paul, you can drop them off with me, and I'll get them to Paul there. Mike Griffin is our treasurer, and he also leads the MAC SIG. Stan Miller is our secretary. Andrew Petrucci is our communication coordinator. And my name is Tom Kreuzer. I'm a director at large. Members old and new, you can pay your dues to Paul. And since Paul isn't here, like I said, drop them off with me. Make sure and notify us if you do have a change in your email, because we send out the notices and all the information to the emails, and if we've got an old email or you change service providers, then we can't keep in touch with you. If you do have any suggestions for topics, you can email those to any back to the board here, or talk to any of the board members. We're always looking for volunteers to present on any hardware or software that they're using. Could be something that you use at work or at home. And if you don't want to present, if you're willing to write a paragraph or a sentence or two or as many pages as you want, we'll include that in our monthly e-Bites newsletter. Out on our website, we do have our past meetings and slides. So after the meeting, I'll be uploading the slides and that we present today. Also, most of the presentations are recorded, so you can go out and actually view the slides and the audio from past meetings also. We have a deals section where there's some codes and some information there. And I mentioned we also have a monthly e-Bites newsletter. And the link to the site, if you took the handout, it's on the last page at the bottom, so you don't have to write anything down there. Any club questions before we get to the main topic? Okay. Our main topic today is scanning pictures, film, and slides. We'll start out with some image basics. Talking about dots per inch and pixels per inch and the difference between monitors and printers, and we'll talk about file types. And these image basics, when I talk about it for scanning, they also pertain to the camera that you're using. So usually you have options or possibly options when you take your photos, whether it's on your phone or your digital camera. You're going to see different file types that they can be saved as and different qualities that it can be saved as. Then we'll talk about scanning, how to do photos, slides and negatives, some of the enhancements that you can do to it, and then I'll actually demo in Picasa how I edit and make changes to photos there. So we'll start out with some of the terms. I mentioned dots per inch, DPI. And another one is PPI, pixels per inch. Dots per inch equals pixels per inch when you're talking about a monitor. So on a monitor or a screen, any of these screens, when you see a reference to DPI or PPI, those are equal to each other. When we talk about dots per inch and pixels per inch on a printer, they are not equal. And the dots per inch and pixels per inch, you need to decide on when you're scanning, and that's going to influence how the quality of that is. And the quality that you need depends on whether you're going to be printing it or just viewing it on the monitor, sending it to somebody, posting it on Facebook. There's all kinds of options there. Monitors and printers work very differently from each other, and we'll talk more about that. And not only is the dots per inch and pixels per inch not equal between the two, but they operate very much differently in the way they deal with colors and how to show you things. Some of the printer properties. The image size is measured on paper and is in inches and centimeters. So when you print out a photo or that, you're saying this is a 3x5 photo or a 4x6 or an 8x10 photo. You usually measure it in size there. The image size does not vary with the scanned resolution. So as you do that, it doesn't change. Image pixels are spaced on the paper using specific scaled resolutions or dots per inch. And to print a color on a printer, it requires several printer ink dots are used to represent a single color, and they're combined with white space and black dots and that to give the illusion that this is a light blue and this is a light green and that. When we talk about a monitor, if you're going to be viewing an image on a monitor, the image size is measured on the screen in pixels. So when the monitors know nothing about a 3x5 inch photo. They just know that the image is so many pixels high and so many pixels wide, and that's the size that it's going to show it. Image sizes vary with the scanned resolution. So if you scan something at a lower resolution, show it on a monitor, it's going to show in a smaller size. You scan it at a higher resolution where there's more pixels, it's going to show up in a bigger size on the monitor there. And we'll be talking a lot more about some of this. Image pixels are located at each screen, 1 pixel for each location. So it's 1 for 1. Each pixel on the screen can represents 1 image pixel, so it's a 1 for 1. Okay, for some of the basics there, if we assume 100% scaling and we start scanning a photograph that's 6 inches by 4 inches, that photo scanned at 100 dots per inches produces a file that is going to end up being 6 inches times the 100 dots per inch, which is 600 by 4 times 100 inches, or 600 by 400 pixels. More or less, this is going to fill a 640 by 480 monitor screen. So it fills that big a chunk on a monitor there, scanned at 100 dots per inch. We take that same photo and now we scan it at 200 dots per inch. We end up with 6 times 200, or 1200 by 800. It's a little bit bigger than a 1024 by 768 monitor. So all of a sudden we've made it that much bigger on the screen there. And if we take that same photo, that 6 inch by 4 inch photo, and we scan it at 600 dots per inch, we produce something that is 6 times 600, or 3,600 by 2,400. Now, if we take an 8 by 10 photo and scan that at 600 dots per inch, you can see we end up with the number of pixels or dots, total dots of 4,800 by 6,000. And most of us don't have a 4K monitor or a monitor even that would show that entire size there. Scanning at a dot per inch, which results in a larger image than what is shown on the screen, does not produce a better result. You won't see it sharper, you won't see it clear. It really doesn't help for viewing it on the monitor. The larger size can be scaled back to fit in a smaller area on the screen, but you've just taken a little longer to scan it, the file is going to be a bigger size, and you're not getting a real benefit by scanning. Now we'll do a little quiz. If we scan at 1200 dots per inch, how many times more dots per inch is that than something that's scanned at 100 dots per inch? So we have A at 4 times, B 12, C 24, or D 144. How many think it's A? Okay, nobody for A. B? Nobody for B. The final output. How many total there? C, well, D. Okay, we've got most everybody D, and those that chose D are correct, because 1200 dots per inch is 144 times more dots per inch than 100 dots per inch. And that's because 100 by 100 gives us 10,000 dots per square inch that the computer is analyzing and figuring out the color for that particular dot. When we go to 1200 by 1200, that's over 1 million, almost 1.5 million dots per square inch it has to figure out. And it has to store that in a file. What color is each of those 1.5 million dots in that square inch of space there? More dots, like I mentioned, are going to take longer to scan, and they're going to produce a much bigger file. So that's that trade-off between size and stuff like that. So let's talk a little more about why a monitor looks better than a photograph. Because people will say, gee, the picture looked really good on the screen, or when I opened it up in an email, or that, but when I printed it out, it looked pretty crappy there, and there's some good reasons there. We mentioned that every dot on the monitor can be reproduced in any of 16 million colors. So every single dot, when we go 1200 by 1200 and we've got 1.5 million dots per inch there, each of those dots can represent 16 million, one of 16 million colors. While a printer has only 4 primary colors. Cyan, which is a kind of a light blue, magenta, which is kind of a light red, yellow, which is yellow, black, and then indirectly you have white also, because if you don't print anything, you have a white background. And that's all it can do for every dot. It's not going to create shades or things like that. The way it creates shades is, okay, here's a picture of a baby. Well, obviously this color here, or the eye, is not one of these cyan, magenta, yellow, or black. It's made up of little dots printed close to each other, which when they're small enough, tricks our eye into thinking that it's this color. And so that's the way it works. And over here you can see another representation of, here we're taking dots, whether they're cyan, magenta, yellow, or black, combining them to form a pattern, and that pattern is tricking the eye into thinking the color is this color. So by combining these 4 primary colors, it can attempt to represent all the different colors that you see on a printed photograph there. Yes? The size of the dot is dependent on the printer that you have. The higher quality printers print very small dots. The less expensive printers print bigger dots. So yes, there is a difference between printers in the size of these little dots that it's doing. But all these different printers are printing, one of these colors, and it's just the fact that they're close to each other that it tricks the eye into thinking that it's a different color. Yes? Right. There are some differences there, and there are more expensive printers that will combine inks together to print a dot, and they have a little different capability. Or if you're talking laser printers, so there are differences in some of them. But the basic inkjet printer operates under this manner there. Okay. Like I mentioned, most printers do not mix colors, so the dot is one of the four colors. In some cases, they'll print them on top of each other or close to each other, but they're not mixing. There is no ink cartridge that magically mixes the colors together and comes out with this taupe color or things like that. It just doesn't happen. Color is simulated by printing the combination of the four colors next to each other to trick the eye. And white space is used to make the colors lighter or stuff like that. If you don't have white space behind it and the dots are bigger and things like that, then it's going to look like a darker color than what it is. Okay, some more basics. The higher the dot per inch of your printer, so if you do have a higher quality one, the smaller the dots and the better those dots will blend together for the eye. And so it will look a lot better, the quality will look a lot smoother. It takes hundreds or thousands of very tiny dots to reproduce a color. That's why we say that dots per inch do not equal pixels per inch on an image. Printers, most of them work very well if you scan something at 200 to 300 pixels per inch there. Scanning a color print and then printing it, so if I take that 4x6 photo and then want to enlarge it 2 times its original size or 3 times its original size, it'll never be as sharp as the smaller print there. Anytime you enlarge, the pixels have to be kind of extrapolated and calculated to a new size there. 150% enlargements from a print are pretty good. You aren't going to notice a loss that much. And 200 isn't too bad, but when you start blowing it up 3 times its original size there, it doesn't look all that great there. And so that's something to keep in mind as you're scanning and what your final use of the image that you're scanning is going to be. Now we'll talk about file types. And the first type that we'll talk about is kind of the highest quality one, and that's a TIFF or a RAW file. And they're the highest quality, but they're also the largest in size. Most use a 24-bit, which is 3 bytes, to represent one of the 16 million colors. So for every tiny pixel, as I mentioned, it could be one of 16 million values. So there's all these different values to represent all the different colors there. There's very little to no compression is done on the image data. So most of the formats, there's no compression done at all. It yields the highest quality image. It yields the highest quality of all the dots there. Oh, let's go back here. So this is a little example here. So this is something that's saved as a RAW file, and it's also saved as a JPEG file. Well, in terms of sharpness, you really won't see too much difference when it's not blown up. It looks pretty much the same. You'll notice a slight variation in the skin itself, because a JPEG is trying to look at that image, and instead of saving every single dot that's on there, trying to say, I've got this block of color that's this big, starts here and this, and so it starts making assumptions and saying, well, if the color within this area is within this tolerance, it's going to save that all as one color. It's not going to save individual points. And by saving it all as one color, instead of this file maybe being 8 megabits in size, it's going to end up being 1 megabit in size or 200K in size, again, depending on what the photograph is and the number of colors and the number of variants of the colors. JPEG does compression and puts the image in there. And so this is also showing here where the same image is blowing up. And again, in terms of sharpness, you really aren't going to see too much difference between the RAW and the JPEG blowing up there. You see a little bit of difference in areas. So this area, instead of doing a real smooth transition from kind of light to dark, you're going to see a little more dramatic change from one to the other because it's going to assume that this block is all the same color there and try and simplify things to keep the file size small. Okay, the other most popular type is the JPEG. And JPEGs work best for photographs with lots of color and smooth gradients of changing of colors from one to another. JPEGs, most of them do use the same 24-bit, 3 bytes to represent one of 16 million colors. So that's why you tend not to see a whole lot of difference in color between RAW files and JPEGs and that. JPEGs support compression, which will cause generational degradation when repeatedly editing and saving a file. And I think Jim's talked in some of his presentations, and I've talked in my presentations, depending on the package that you're using, some packages, when you edit a file and save it, it saves a brand new copy of that image. And that image, if it was a JPEG, it ends up being compressed. And then the next generation is compressed. And the next generation is compressed. And you start losing quality there. And so that's something to be aware of. Too much compression or repeated editing will cause the image to get blurry. It'll lose all of its sharpness. This is an example. If I create a JPEG and I save that first JPEG with 80% and then saved it again with 80%, it's now about 64% of the original quality. If I edit it 3 more times and save it, all of a sudden that quality is down to 30%. And if I do it 10 times, I'm down to about 10% of the original quality of the photograph because of that compression and the loss of stuff there. So depending on the editing package you're using and things like that, JPEGs and whether you're going against the original file, it's very important to the quality that you're going to end up with. The third type of file is GIF, and GIFs work best for line art or limited colors where you have sharp edges. That can be forms, can be lines, shapes, logos, cartoons, things like that. Excuse me. GIFs use 8-bit, 1 byte to represent up to 256 colors. And GIFs also support animation. So these are some examples where GIFs work very well. If you have a form, rather than scan that in as a RAW format or as a JPEG, scanning it in as a GIF is a much better idea there. And if you have line art or kids' drawings or things like that, scanning stuff in as a GIF is going to give you the best results there. So here's some examples here. And so what I did is I took this photograph. That's me in the middle there. And this is from about 1970 or so. This is a 3.5 by 5 photograph. And I scanned it, first scanned it in at 75 dots per inch. Scanning it in at 75 dots per inch gave me a TIFF file size, TIFF or RAW there, of roughly 286 kilobytes. When I scan the same image in as a JPEG with 90% 90% size, which is 10% compression, it ends up being 77 kilobytes. So you can see it's about 4 times smaller. If I scanned it in as a GIF, it ends up being 76 kilobytes. If I displayed it on the screen and I displayed it at this size, you would not see any difference between the TIFF, the JPEG, and the GIF file there. Then I scanned it at 300 dots per inch. So when I scan it at 300 dots per inch, you can see the file size for the TIFF went up to 4.5 megabytes. The JPEG went up to about a half a megabyte there, and the GIF is a little over a megabyte there. And what I'm trying to show down here is I took from that image, I cropped out a small area of that image and then blew it up. You can see when I take the 75 dots per inch and blow that up, this is what it ends up looking like. When I take the 300 dots per inch and blow it up, you can see it's much sharper there. Even though this looks exactly the same on the screen, the 300 dots per inch on the screen for this size photograph, I'm not going to notice it being any sharper or that. So let's do it at 600 dots per inch. Now our file size went up to a little over 18 megabytes. JPEG is now a little over 2 megabytes, and our GIF size is about 4 megabytes there. And you can see, scanning at 600 dots per inch, it's a little bit sharper than what the 300 dots per inch, but it really isn't any sharper because the fact of the matter is this small photograph, even though you're going at a finer resolution to scan, it doesn't have that sharpness. It's made up of a lower quality, so you're never gonna be able to improve it beyond what you're getting almost in the 300 dots per inch there. Line art, if you take, I took an 8x10 and scanned it at 300 dots per inch, the TIFF size ended up being 21 megabytes in size. JPEG, 500, about a half a megabyte there. And the GIF, you can see, is 84K. So again, this gets back to if you are scanning things that are line art, drawings that kids have done, a form, you're scanning in orders that you have and you want to keep them. You really don't have to scan them in as JPEGs or as RAW or things like that. You can get them, you can scan them in as GIFs, and you're going to end up with much smaller files that'll actually be better quality than the other format. Yes. PDF is kind of completely different. That ends up almost like a Word document type of a deal, and I wouldn't recommend saving anything as PDF format. Because PDF format, let's say you wanted to edit that in a photo package, you're not going to find, I don't know of packages. I don't know. Do you know, Jim, if there's photo packages that let you edit a PDF?
No, they're not.
Yeah. So, yeah, you know, if you're dealing with photos and things like that, you really want it in one of these other formats.
If you have Adobe Acrobat, full, not the reader, you can export a PDF as a format that a program like Lightroom or Kreuzer or something like that, and then edit, but you have to have full Acrobat for your export.
Yeah, and some of the packages, what they'll do with like that PDF, like I say, it's very similar to a Word in that it'll take the text and put the text in this, and if there's a picture, because in a PDF you may have a small picture here, a bigger picture here, on another page you may have another picture. So these packages, when they export it, attempt to break that up and save those portions as JPEGs or that you can then use in other packages. But if you're scanning in original and you're looking to save it or send it or things like that, that's where if you know that you're going to want to edit it and do things like that, save it in one of these other formats there. Okay, any other questions? Okay, scanning, what do you need? Well, you're going to need some hardware. For scanning photographs, most of us already have a scanner because if you have a multifunction printer, that comes with a scanner. And we'll talk a little more about that in a little bit. If you're scanning slides and negatives, the average scanner that you have on your printer does not work for scanning slides and negatives. So you're going to need some other type of scanner. We'll talk about some of the options there. The other thing that a lot of people forget about is you do have a digital camera, and a digital camera is a great alternative for scanning things. You can take a picture of it. Yes, Jim?
There are apps now that allow you to use your camera on your smartphone.
Cameras, if you're familiar with packages like OneNote or Evernote, those are packages also that'll take your camera and embed them into documents and let you save and things like that. But the camera can be a very nice thing. I don't recommend it for, let's say you had a whole stack of old photographs that were 4x6. I don't recommend it for that, but let's say you've got a portrait. You've got a portrait painting or stuff like that. That's where you can use the camera because it won't fit in your scanner. Get the right lighting, and you can end up with a good digital image of something like that. So cameras can be used for a number of objects that you're looking to scan there. In addition to the hardware, you should have some software, and the software, you're going to use that to rotate the images, crop it, enhance it. Maybe you want to create titles, things like that, and also for renaming and organizing the files. So you really do need a piece of software there, and we'll talk about some of that in a little bit here. This is one of the multifunction printers that I have. I think I paid $39 for this one a couple of years ago. This only lets me scan. It's a flatbed, so this cover comes up and I can put the photographs on there. It scans at a maximum resolution of 1,200 dots per inch, which, if you're familiar, if you remember our numbers and stuff there, for the photographs and stuff like that, you aren't going to need anything higher quality than that because your original image isn't that high quality. So having a scanner that can do higher dots per inch is not going to benefit you there. My scanner can only scan one photo at a time. It's also a wireless printer there. Okay, scanning photos. I mentioned scanning at a higher resolution than what you need is going to use up more disk space without improving the image quality. So again, there's no sense in scanning at a higher quality than what you really need. You're just kind of wasting your time because it's going to take a little longer to scan, and you're going to end up with an image which is much larger but not any sharper. So it's important to figure out what you need there. If you scan at too low a resolution, though, and you then want to blow it up or show it on the monitor big and you scanned it at a smaller size, trying to enlarge it, it's not going to look very good trying to enlarge it. So that's where you have to understand how you're going to use it, how good is the original image that you're scanning, and that's going to help you determine what you should use there. If all you want to do is send a picture or an email or somebody to view it on the screen and Facebook or things like that, really you can get by in most cases with 75 dots per inch because that's really the resolution that the screen is limited to. Your monitors and things like that are limited to 75 dots per inch. If you scan at a higher resolution, well, yeah, it could take more of the screen, but if you're taking a photograph that's 6 inches by 4 inches and scanning at 75 dots per inch, most packages and most people aren't going to look at that image on the screen larger than 6 inches by 4 inches. They don't need it any larger. Say, and scanning at the lower dots per inch, again, you're going to have a smaller file size, be faster to upload it. It's also going to be quicker in scanning and stuff like that too. Okay, some tips. We mentioned scanning photographs. Well, don't scan photographs unless you don't have the original negatives or the slides. If you've got the original, yes.
What about with color?
If I know, like, let's go back here. Let's see if I can, like this picture here. Well, this picture here, if I scanned it at 75 dots per inch, and the original picture was this big, so I cut it out of a magazine and I did that, I'm going to end up with that size on here. So I'm not trying to blow it up into millions of pixels by millions of pixels. On this screen right now, this screen is probably going 1400 by 1100 or something like that, this screen that I have here. And I'm only using a fraction of that screen. So this image is less than 640 pixels across that I'm displaying there. So I don't have to scan it at any higher quality than what I'm going to be using it for. Does that make sense? Okay. Another question, or?
No, I was just trying to point that.
Okay. Okay. No. Good question.
For daylight emulsion photograph, what's the maximum resolution when you scan it? What's the resolution of a typical photograph?
You'll see some of my suggestions on what I use. If the photograph is really sharp, then I'll usually scan at 600 dots per inch. If the photograph is not, what's that?
The resolution of the daylight.
Yeah. The original photographs and the printing mechanism, when you talk about how photographs are printed and the negatives and stuff like that, that's a completely different technology than what we're using for the computers and scanning and that. But the bottom line is you can play around with different resolutions to see if it makes it any better going at a higher there. It used to be the size of your file used to be much more important because hard disk space was more costly, and transmission times, if you were uploading or sending to people, were much longer. Now it's not quite as much of an issue. However, like I mentioned, if you're scanning at a higher resolution and not getting better quality, you're just kind of wasting your time and taking up hard disk space. So it's a matter of finding what you really need there. And if I take my old photographs and I turn them into DVDs, well, the resolution on the DVD showing it on a TV screen, again, depends on the quality that you're outputting for that DVD, but you can get by with low-res pictures that look great on there. They don't have to be high-res pictures there. Okay? So if you have the original negatives or slides for that matter, by all means scan those, don't scan the photographs. Now a lot of us don't have the original slides, then you do end up having to scan the photographs. Yes?
When I was working with at that time they have tuners that were designed with grades that you set them in and then put them on the way that I don't know where those are.
You'll see. I'll cover a little bit of that in a second here. Okay. Any other? So use the original for photographs. like I mentioned, basically any scanner will work. The cheap flatbed scanner that came with your printer there will work great for doing those. I scan, like I mentioned, if the photos look very sharp, and so let's say I was taking pictures back in the 70s. I was using a 35 millimeter camera, and so the quality was very good there. And I'll scan those at 600 dots per inch. I also have stuff from the 70s that my mom took, and she was using a 110 or the disc camera, if you remember those. Well, those are low quality, and so scanning them at 600 dots per inch, again, you end up with a larger file. It isn't going to be any sharper. The image is just not sharp to begin with. It's not going to be sharp after you attempt to scan it. So that's where understanding what it is, like I say, the maximum that I usually do is 600 dots per inch there. I save my JPEGs, and I do it as a JPEG, 90% with 10% compression there. So I don't save them as raw files or TIFF files. For this purpose, that's fine. For not so sharp photos, that's the 110s and older stuff that maybe isn't that sharp, I'll scan at 200 to 300 dots per inch. It ends up being 9 times smaller, and it's also much faster to scan. So if you're scanning, when I scanned, a little history, I took my parents' photographs that they had, all the albums and all the books and stuff like that, and I had 13,000 images. And you're not going to do that in one night. You're not going to do it in 1 week. You're not going to do it in 1 month. It takes years. I'll warn you, it takes years to do. So it's a case of the faster that you can make the scans, all of a sudden, instead of doing 50 in an hour, you're doing 500 in an hour. So the faster that you can make it, you're gonna end up with more there. If you're just viewing for a PC or on the TV, and that's where I mentioned if I want to do a quick scan of something and pop it up on Facebook or something like that, I'm usually just scanning it at 75 dots per inch or 150, and that's going to look fine up there. And it's much smaller than the 600 dots per inch, and yet on the screen it's going to look exactly the same as if I had scanned it at 600 as I had scanned it at 75 dots per inch. Remember that you can always convert from a high resolution to a lower. So again, if these are for archival purposes and you want the highest resolution and you're going to throw away the photographs after you're done scanning them, scan them at the highest that you want. Like in my case, the 600 dots per inch for the nice sharp things. But after I scanned them at 600 dots per inch, we got rid of most of them. No sense keeping them around. We've got them all. And a new scanner isn't going to come out that's suddenly going to make it, these photographs pop and be sharper and stuff like that. You aren't going to see anything like that. So there's no possibility down the road that some new technology will make it sharper, because it isn't that good to begin with, and that's what you end up with. Yes.
We can be confident that for eternity, JPEG is going to be recognized.
JPEG or some form there. You're always going to, 20 years from now, will something else be in there? Well, you would have been able to convert your current to a future, and especially if you store them up on a cloud storage. Google Photos, as an example, Google's going to have the capabilities to save them in the current formats and that. I'm not talking about where I think most people get hung up is when you do your photographs, and if you put them to a CD or you write them to a DVD, that's the formats that change. The base format of the photograph, if you look at JPEG's been around forever and probably is going to continue on.
in here. And then as you are in your fourth or fifth generation of computer, are those disks going to be usable?
No, and as far as backup, we've kind of had other topics with backup, and that's what you have to decide there is what are the mechanism and means that you use for backup. And certainly, personally myself, I recommend cloud storage and your own hard drive. If you've got them on those two, you're usually pretty safe there.
So if I understand what you're saying then, when you're saving the file to a choice of either CD or to a cloud type backup, you're doing it the same way, but in the CD is going to limit your accessibility.
I don't recommend a CD.
Okay. Well,
don't put it on a CD.
That was all that was really kind of
and even the case of, I used to create DVDs for people. Now I don't create DVDs anymore. I can create a movie and I can put that up on YouTube for free and I can share it with the world. So why should I create a DVD? But we'll continue on. That's kind of a different topic there. Some other tips here. Before you start scanning your photographs, make sure and sequence them, because if you're taking them out of a book or you're taking them out of that shoebox, get them in the order before you start scanning them. It's much easier to organize them, to pick out duplicates, to do those things with the images right in front of you than it is once you scan it there. Also make sure and scan other things like awards, school papers, drawings, yearbooks. So instead of keeping the whole yearbook, maybe you go through the yearbook and you scan 3 or 4 pictures in there that interest you, and you can throw the yearbook away. You don't have to keep everything forever. I'm not encouraging hoarding there. This is.
The other thing, now there's all this talk about you have this stuff in the house, you have to set up a legal will type situation so to get access to that way.
Yes, and you'll notice what I said is I have it up in the cloud. I also have it on a hard drive. So you want it multiple places. Don't trust one place.
So a hard drive is better than a CD?
Oh, yes, 100 times better than a CD. Yep. Okay, some other tips here, because we're running out of time and I like to cover a few things. Make sure the scanner glass is clean and dust-free. You can use the 3M cloth to clean it. The underside of the glass, if you've got an older printer or you see kind of a cloud image on your scanner where it's kind of gone bad there, buy a new scanner. I mean, again, $39, you can get a new printer and a nice clean scanner. Don't go through all the time and effort and end up with so-so pictures. So you do want to get as high a quality if you're going to be spending your time doing it in that. Don't touch the glass with your finger. So as you're putting photographs on there and removing them, what I do is, let's say this is a photograph. The next one that I have, I take that photograph, lift it up with this to get it off, and put it down. You don't want to be touching that glass. Because if you touch the glass with your finger has oil on it. And that oil is going to cause smudges. Yes?
You can also get plastic tweezers from Amazon that actually use in production.
Yeah, just make sure that you're not leaving smudges, because if you leave smudges, it's going to impact the quality of your scans and that. So you want that glass to be, crystal clear and that. Clean photos of dust before you scan them. So don't leave a lot of dust on there. If you're taking them out of old scrapbooks that have the scrapbook paper that can be full of different stuff, make sure and clean it off and that. And I do clean my glass on the scanner after about every 30, 40 pictures. I'll just take the cloth, wipe it over, clean it off. I can usually scan about 200 pictures in an hour. And that's the manual method of doing stuff. Take the photos out of an album. So if you have them in an album, in the plastic deals there, don't try and scan them through the plastic. Your quality will be very suspect there. So don't leave them in the album. I try and, my old scanner let me scan multiple photos at a time. So if your scanner supports it, certainly use that option, and I'll show you in a little bit what that looks like. First, do the preview, adjust the size of each of the scanned images you want, and then you won't have to do as much cropping of the picture also if you do that. And then you do a finish or a save of the scan and go on to your next photos. And your next photos, you don't have to do the preview again. Just leave the preview with the old thing in there and put your pictures in the same location, and you can do a file save, and that can speed things up. Don't worry about the rotation of the images. You can then, you're going to clean that up after. And when you have a new photo size, that's when you change the preview and set the sizes. And this is what I used to do. With a scanner that I had, I could do 4 at a time, and I'd set up the 4 images, the size of the image, and I could scan 4 of them. So instead of doing 1 where it went, down, it's scanning 4 at once there. Makes it much faster for doing your deals. Now, not all the scanners support that. A number of the new ones just support one area at a time. Yes, Jim?
A lot depends on the software, scanning software.
Yes. Yeah.
You can buy software other than comes with your scanner, allow you to do multiple things. Even your scanner software.
Because I know some people that have said, well, my scanner doesn't support it, so I'm going to scan the whole flatbed area, and then in my photo editing package, I'm going to break that up into 4 pictures. And that I found is more work than scanning the one. So, trial and error and see what you have there. Some of the scanners out there have an auto document feeder where you can place a stack of 25 pictures in it and let it scan. So again, if you're going to have a lot to do and your friend has a printer that does have a feeder in there, you may want to borrow that printer and scan with that. Because then you can load them in, you can go off, do some other work, come back in 5 minutes or 10 minutes, put another stack of photos in, and just let it crank away there. Old photos that are taped or glued in scrapbooks can be scanned as an entire page, so that you don't have to take out of the page if you can fit it into your scanner there. And just make sure it's flat against the glass. Preview, mark a single or multiple images, and then don't worry about it being straight or aligning. You can do that very easily in most of the photo editing packages. Use a digital camera for large ones. Scanning slides and negatives. Most scanners do not let you scan the slides and negatives. A film scanner has a light source, usually has a light source behind the slide or negative that you're scanning. I started out in 2002. I bought a scanner off of eBay for $59. And I use that to scan a few thousand slides and negatives. Because the slides and negatives are smaller, and because they're higher quality, I'm scanning at 2,400 dots per inch. And so that's the difference in quality. The quality is in the negatives and in the slides. It's not in your print that you have. So scanning at a higher DPI for that small thing is necessary to give you the best quality there. This is a scanner that I used. The light source is up here in the top, and it's going, you put your slides or negatives, and then the scanner picks it up down below. I used that for about 8 years. Then in 2010 to today, I use this. So this is a very simple little device. So you can pick them up for anywhere from $30 to $100, and this has a USB, connects into the computer. Essentially what it has is it has a little light source down here in the base, has a camera up here. There's just a little camera up here, fixed focus camera that is specifically made to just take your image that you have, and all you do is manually, move it across. It takes a picture. It's very fast, so literally I just push a button, and that's captured and on the computer. So unlike a scanner that has moving parts and takes a while to scan, this doesn't. It just light source, camera, push a button, click, sends it to the computer. Unfortunately, this does not work with Windows 10. The version that I bought does not work with Windows 10. I bought it back in 2010. So I'm looking to get something different, and this is probably what I'll end up with here. This is an example. I just pulled this off of eBay yesterday. This is a similar type device, except you can see this is a little better. This has a little LCD screen. I can see what it has. The other nice thing about this is this, while it does have a USB port, does not have to be plugged into the computer. You put an SD card, similar to your camera, put it in there, take your slides, take your negatives, put them through, push the button, it's going to the SD card. When you've done enough of them, you take your SD card out, you could load that up into any computer, and now you have your digital images there. So for $50, you can easily scan your photos, easily scan your negatives and your slides. Tips for the slides, get them in the sequence just like you did with your photos. It's a lot easier ahead of time than it is after the fact. Only scan the ones that you need. So if you took 6 pictures of something, all the same, and find the best one and only take the best one. You don't need everything there. Make sure the scanner glass is clean and dust and that in there. So you do want to blow it out with air or that. And I could scan about 60 slides or negatives an hour using this method. You use an air can and or a brush to remove dust, because it's especially important on your slides and negatives because any speck of dust, when you start blowing it up, because you're scanning something that's very small and blowing it up, you'll see this big chunk on there. Make sure to have the slides in the proper side up. There is a difference between sides in terms of stuff being upside down or not upside down, but right to left being out if you don't have it. So make sure everything's in the right direction to give you the highest quality. If the original is too light or dark, adjust before scanning to get a better range of color. So that scanner that I showed you before, it'll show you on the LCD, it's actually doing just like a camera. It's adjusting itself to give you the best quality, but there are some other adjustments on there to further adjust if it was too dark or too light. Enhancing and cropping, you can use all kinds of packages. Once you've scanned in your images and you're ready to go, prices there range from 0 to 500. I still recommend the use of Picasa. We'll see Jim's presentation next month there. At this point, I'm still using Picasa, even though Google isn't going to come out with new versions. It still works for me and has the tools that I need. I start by selecting the images that need to be rotated. I get them in the right direction. I edit the pictures, do alignment, straightening, cropping if needed, autocorrect, sharpen if needed, and if the image needs work, I've got other tools like for retouching and things like that. Then I move on to the next image. So I'm going quickly through there. Naming and organizing, because as you scanned in the pictures, there's no name on there, or they're not in a folder, or things like that. You want to rename your images. I use Picasa to rename. I give them all a name that starts with the year that they were taken, the month, the day, and then other information after. This lets me sort the images by the file name to get them in order. Where you don't know the date, You know, frequently on slides you do have a date, so you can say, well, this is the date it was actually, film was processed. If it was processed in June and it's a Christmas picture, it was probably Christmas the year before. You know, you can figure out usually, or this birthday, well, it must have been this. So find the best date that you can. I also changed the photo date to match the file name. So once I put the date on here, I'll go through a chunk of photos and change the photo date. And Picasa lets you do that so that I can make it look like those images were taken in 1975. That way when I load them up to a site like Google Photos uses the photo date to organize photos and to show when they were taken. Things will be in the right order. Things will be in the show up not all together and things like that. And it's needed because as you start scanning more and more images, you're going to have hundreds, thousands of images, and if you combine them with stuff from your parents, or brothers and sisters, you're going to end up with a lot of images. So you best start organizing and doing stuff. You can put these images into folders, either by year, trip, event. I try and keep the folders to 500 images or less. So I'll break them up. This was a wedding. That may be separate by itself, or maybe I had a lot at one Christmas. I'll break that up into its own folder there. Back up your images, and we won't go into any detail, but I mentioned external hard drive and online is what I personally recommend. Quick demo of Picasa, or over time, if any. Yes.
One of the tips you got.
Yep.
When you're scanning old photos, check the back. If you're like all my family photos, my mother wrote some information on the back. So I scan the back first, and then I scan the image. And I know those two are tied together, and it gives me something, a history of that photo, so that when I work later, I can put that image, that data into something like Lightroom, keyword,
Okay, I'll just give a quick demo of Picasa. So this is an example of a photograph. I have to turn it. Okay, one click I can turn it. One click I can get the colors better. I'm all set there. If I had to crop out stuff, I'd crop that at this time. Here's another one. Don't have to turn it, but I can do the I'm lucky. If I want to sharpen it because it's not quite as sharp or it gets a little blurry there, Picasa has a nice option for sharpening where you can go in. I can adjust the sharpness, and now it's sharper there. This is an example of a photograph. This was taken with a 110 camera. Looks pretty crappy quality there. But with a few clicks here, I can go here. I'm going to crop this because this is what the image is. So let's crop it. I'm going to do I'm feeling lucky. And I can do sharpen. And you'll notice like the St. John's here. This is, I can go in here. I can make it a little sharper there. And I've taken something that was barely, viewable and made it acceptable here. So I'm going through. Here's another one of me in grade school. And you'll notice like in this case, I mentioned that you don't have to worry too much if you're doing pages where stuff is out of alignment, because it's fairly easy to do in these packages here, where I can do here, straighten. So I come here. I straighten out my image. Let's do the apply. I come in here. I crop my image. I crop it. I do the apply. I do best there. Then I see here, oh, I've got some dust or something on here. Well, again, basic tools in some of these. I can go in here and I can come in here. Well, here, let's back out here. So let's say I wanted to work with, I want to get rid of that piece of dust down there. Well, to get rid of that, I can go here. I can take this piece of dust. I can line it up. I can take this piece of dust. I can line it up. I can do an apply. Got rid of the dust. So you can easily, or here's another example here. Let's go here. See, we see some dust up in here. Want to fix that? Do the retouch. Go in here. Done. So, and it's not just this package. I mean, I use Picasa. I'm a fan of that, but you'll see with Jim demonstration next week with Lightroom, there's hundreds of packages that you can do similar types of things in here. And so you can take these images that may not look the best in their current state, you can transform them into some really good things there. What's that? Yeah, it's kind of equivalent. It doesn't have all of the features of a Photoshop. If I wanted to add another person in here, cut a person out of one picture and put them in another, it doesn't have all that. But for simple type editing, it lets you do that. Okay. We'll let the people go here. Thanks for coming. If you do have some other questions, you can do that. If you have any picnic or membership, you can drop them off with me and I'll take those. Yes?
Picasa, you say that it doesn't modify.
Yes, Picasa, until you do an export here, Picasa is doing this. So all these things that I did to this picture here, I can come back here a year later or 2 years later, and you'll see over here, here's an undo. I can undo this. I can undo that.
Is that creating a different image in the photo?
No, the better photo packages just keep track of your actions. So they're just keeping track of your actions to the original image. They aren't making copies of the original. There's still just one image on the PC.
Back it off.
Yes. When you're completely done with all of this editing, usually what I'll do is I will export it to get them into a format that now any package can deal with. Because while I have it in Picasa and I make those cropping and I change the color and retouch, it's not available for me to, let's say, upload into Facebook or put on another package. Until I export it, then it'll create a new file, and that new file, let's go back here quickly. So I go back here, I can take these 4 that I just had here, I can do an export, and you'll see when I export, I can choose what file size to save them as, and usually the best is original there, and then image quality, I can set the percent. So for a JPEG or that, I can tell it what 90% or 80%.
Can you export the original or the edited version?
Well, I actually keep both. Myself, I keep both, the original and the modified version. The modified version is what I end up using and putting into photo albums and uploading to Picasa, or Google Photos. No, normally you don't there. And Jim could speak a lot more there. You always want to keep the original in there.
And if you do multiple edits, you
go back to the original. Yeah. So if you cropped it, and let's say you created a picture and you wanted it to fit beautifully in a 5x7, you don't just take that 5x7 and save it. You keep the original, because maybe a year from now, you might want an 8x10.
You could keep exploring different versions of it.
Yes, yes.
You've got a raw file. Originally. As Tom said, some of the programs do what's called constructive editing. They change the original. The advantage of something like Lightroom, non-destructive. I took 140 pictures up at Blue over the weekend.
Oh, these are two. All I've got is 2 memberships so far. Oh, you've got some. Okay.
48 of them.
Well, I can hold on to these and give them to Paul.
I have the original.
No, these are too to be a member there.
On the internet for
Oh. You export them out.
I export them out, yep, and I'll show you how to do that next month.
Okay, well, thank you.
Is the scanner you're looking at for slides negatives and notes?
No, it's on the PowerPoint. I didn't list it in there, but actually if you want to see a bunch of different scanners and that, certainly you can search on eBay or that, and you'll see all kinds of them. Because if you want something more automated than, you know, manually pulling stuff through, there's, what's that?
For money.
She'll take the money for the picnic if you have money for the picnic or signing up for the picnic.
So it doesn't care if the slide's in a cardboard frame or not?
No, usually what they're these holders. Let's see.
I've actually got a scanner old enough, a Canon scanner old enough that it's got a little thing like that. I can mount 4 slides or a strip of negatives in.
Oh, okay.
And then I modify the scanner to have the light shine through, etc.
Yeah.
This would be so much easier.
And that's the one not connected to the computer, because I thought once I got this, I thought, oh, it's acting as a camera, so I shouldn't have any problem with Windows 10 or a new version of Windows. But I was surprised when it didn't work, and then I searched on the internet, and it was a case of no, everybody was complaining that it didn't work and there were no drivers, and so the only solution was, if you wanted to use something in Windows 10, was to get a different thing there.
So you just searched on Amazon for scanners, or?
Yeah. Let me pull it up here if I can. Here, let me first stop.
The other issue I have is that I've